Welcome to Haynes Motor Museum. I'm Nick, one of the volunteers here, and I'm in the rather wonderful Red Room. I'll be telling you a story of the rise and fall of the British sports car using examples of 4 cars from our collection of over 350 vehicles. When visitors come here, they say, "Why so many red cars?" Well, the answer is quite simple. Our founder, John Haynes, wanted a room where all the cars were the same colour so people could concentrate on the styling and design of each car rather than whether they were red, green or yellow. This fits perfectly with our story because we're going to be looking at the styling of each of our cars, why they're styled in that way, and then a bit of background and a few fun facts about each car. Let's have a look at our first car, an MGTC from 1946. Let me give a bit of background about the car. If we look at the 1920s and 30s, cars became much more popular. Mass production meant that they were cheaper and they were used every day and for leisure and for racing. Cars like this sort of sports car from MG were born. If we flip forward to 1946, it was a period of shortage and rationing and a massive war debt. The government directed raw materials like steel to producers who were willing and able to sell their product overseas, especially to the USA. MG, like other car manufacturers, took up this challenge and used their cars to sell abroad. Let's have a look at the styling of this car. Look how narrow it is. Everything about this car is narrow. The bonnet, the bodywork, the tyres. Look how narrow the tyres are. This was a lightweight sports car, and it was a very successful one in the USA because it was not like the cars in the US. American servicemen based over here during the war had seen these cars. These cars were the choice of Spitfire pilots and they wanted to take the cars home. And they did. You might say, why does the car look like this? Well, the answer is quite simple. This is a pre-war design. There weren't any new designs to use in 1946, so they went back to the design and the styling of the 1930s and the engineering. But it worked because it had the appeal of the good old days. This car sold around 10,000 in the 4 years up until 1950 before it was replaced by the MGTD. What we've got here as an engine is a 1250cc 4-cylinder, which was powerful for the time. It was good for 78 miles an hour, but it didn't accelerate very fast. It took nearly 23 seconds to get to 60. But imagine driving this. It was lightweight, it had 2 live axles, it would feel fast, and if you wanted the real wind in the hair experience, then all you had to do was to lower the windscreen. Imagine what driving one of these would feel like in the early to mid 1940s. One fun fact about this car, of course, is that it has the very famous MG badge. MG standing for Morris Garages, to distinguish them from the everyday Morris cars. And we think, we're not certain, that the octagon around it represents the racing circuits where MG had achieved so much success. Here we've got our second car, the Triumph TR4A. And the A is really important, I'll come back to that. If you were in the market for a sports car in the mid-1960s, then you might think about an MG Midget, Triumph Spitfire, or an MGB. These were about £600, £700, £800 at a time when the average wage was probably £1,000 a year. If you had really deep pockets, you'd go for an E-Type, but they were £2,000. Or for just under £1,000, you could choose the Triumph TR4A. I think this is an absolutely beautiful car. Look at the styling here over the headlights. Look how delicate the grille is. See the side lights and the indicators, and the chrome strips along the wings, and at the back the very muted fins. This one is what's called a Surrey top, a semi-hard top. Most of them built were actually convertibles. To go with these good looks, the car also had serious performance for the period. Just over 2-litre engine under the bonnet here, which was good for about 11 seconds 0 to 60 and over 100 miles an hour. And the TR4A part, this version of the car, had independent rear suspension, so it was quite a comfortable ride. Now you might say, why does this car look like this? Well, the secret is in the designer and the stylist, because Triumph recruited an Italian designer, Giovanni Michelotti, to design their cars to compete with Austin Morris, to produce more attractive cars. So what we've got here is a combination of British engineering plus Italian design equals success. In 2 years, this car sold 28,000. Many of them went to the USA. So, fun fact about the Triumph TR4A is the badge. And we note here we've got a map of the world. This goes back to the kind of badge that Triumphs had in the 1920s and 30s. So there was a nostalgia angle here. Sadly though, this was the last time this kind of badge appeared on a Triumph. And in some ways that symbolises the decline of Triumph and its virtual disappearance into BL. Badges after that were much plainer. We've spoken about the rise of the British sports car and used 2 different examples. Now we're going to move on to the decline. One of the reasons for the decline was the increasing competition from overseas. We've got an example here from Porsche, a 1965 356C. This is a really important car for Porsche. It was the first car to bear their name from 1948 onwards, and it is the car that sets the template for the Porsche sports car. Let's have a look at its styling. We've got a low, streamlined car with hardly a flat surface on it. It fits the Porsche template because the engine's not in the front, the engine is in the rear, and it's air-cooled. Very delicate use of chrome. See here? Quite subtle use of chrome. And round the windscreen. To go with these looks, we had performance which was actually quite similar to the TR4A. 0 to 60 times and top speed times were very similar. One difference was, though, that this was twice the price of the TR4A. This was about £2,000. You could buy 2 TR4As or 4 Minis at the same time, to give you some idea of how exclusive this was. So how can we understand the styling on this car? Well, it was designed by Ferry Porsche, the son of Ferdinand Porsche. And Ferdinand Porsche was the founder of Volkswagen and the designer of the Beetle. So you can see there are elements of Beetle design here, but applied to a sports car. And it works very well. In many people's eyes, this is a design icon. Couple of fun facts about the 356. Why is it called the 356? Well, Ferry Porsche was a very rational, logical person. He decided to number all of his projects. And quite simply, this was project 356. Simple, logical. When he came to project 901, however, he ran into a problem because he'd made 82 Porsche 901s, and then Peugeot came along and said, no, you can't use 901 because we've trademarked that number. So Porsche, being a very practical person, said, okay, what we'll do is we won't use the 0 in the middle, we'll use the 1. The 911 was born. Now to look at our fourth car, the Datsun 240Z. One of the most important sports cars of all time, possibly even one of the most important Japanese cars of all time. If you think about the sorts of cars that Datsun were producing in the UK and the US in the 1960s, they were mostly economy, small boxy cars, well equipped compared with the British competition, but that was it. Datsun, or as they're commonly known now, Nissan, wanted to change all of that. And this was the result of their change. Let's have a look at its styling. We've got a long bonnet here with recessed headlights, a bit like an E-Type perhaps, a nice open grille here, perhaps a bit of Ferrari, and around the back, you probably can't see very well, there are elements of a Mustang. So the car had good looks. It also had strong performance. Straight six, 2.4 litre, good for over 120 miles an hour or 8 seconds, 0 to 60. This was strong performance for the time, much faster than the equivalent MGB GT. So why is this car styled in this way? The answer is in the Japanese approach to the market. They wanted to understand the market. They did their market research. They looked at what were the successful cars. They knew the Mustang had been a great success. But they also knew that the British sports cars weren't completely practical. So they designed the everyday sports car. You can see the formula for success now. We've got great looks, really good performance, we've got reliability that the Japanese were associated with, and the final piece of the jigsaw was the price. At $3,600 in the US when it was launched, this was cheaper than America's sports car, as it was called, the Corvette. It was half the price of a 911 and about the same price as the MGB GT with much stronger performance. Perhaps it's no surprise that in 2 years they sold 150,000 cars, 500,000 cars in 10 years, and it started a line of Z cars, or Z cars as the Americans would call them, that continues to today, 50 years on. One interesting fun fact is that in Japan, this car was known as the Fair Lady Z, but they decided that wasn't a suitable name for the UK and the US, so they called it the 240Z. In other words, they even named the car to fit the market. Another secret of the success. We've spoken about the rise of the British sports car and its sad decline, brought about by increased competition from overseas and the rise of the hot hatch. The British sports car's not disappeared completely though. Firms like Lotus and Morgan, as well as low volume producers like Ariel, BAC, Caterham and Ginetta are still producing cars, but these are more track-focused cars. Fortunately though, we are able to enjoy and celebrate British sports cars that were once the envy of the world in museums like this.